My name is Diana DiGaspero, and I'll be presenting on my study, which is also my doctoral dissertation, titled Changing Public Perception of Dementia, the Effect and Credibility of Three Informational Models. Here is a brief outline of my presentation for today. I have not yet gathered my data, although I aim to do so by the end of May or mid-June, and so I will discuss the analyses I will conduct, but I do not have results as of today. So dementia is a syndrome that's very common, affects more than 50 million people worldwide, with Alzheimer's disease being a specific type of dementia that accounts for 60 to 70% of cases. So it's only within the last 50 years or so that we have thought of dementia from a biomedical standpoint. So this is currently our kind of dominant conceptualization of dementia, but the biomedical model really focuses on biological processes of the disease. What are the symptoms, what's going on in the body to cause deterioration that's associated with dementia. In the 1990s or so, there began a movement that continues today to try to have a more integrative perception, conceptualization of dementia. So the biopsychosocial approach is more integrative, where it looks at not only biological factors, but also psychological, social, and environmental factors that all interact to affect the experience of the person living with dementia. So this approach is gaining traction, but the biomedical model is still the primary one that is kind of in our culture and in many cultures around the world. So the biopsychosocial model looks at kind of a more whole person perspective, but is still very focused on what are the symptoms, what are the problems, and how do we alleviate those, as compared to a positive psychology framework, which would acknowledge the symptoms, the problems, the disease process, while also recognizing the strengths, the positive experiences, and the ability to enhance well-being in people with dementia. And given that dementia is such a stigmatized syndrome that is really not well understood by the public, the way that we describe dementia really matters in terms of people's perceptions, stigma, and therefore the real life lived experience of people with dementia and their families. My first aim of this study is to test if the way that dementia is portrayed affects the perception of people with dementia among the general adult population in the US. My second aim is to explore factors that predict perception of people with dementia, which includes stigma, attitudes, attribution of controllability of behavior, and responses to a vignette. And then finally, I am aiming to assess the perceived credibility of each of the three informational models of dementia. So I will briefly go over my procedure so that the hypotheses make a bit more sense. But I am aiming to recruit 270 participants, hoping to get an even distribution of age among adults, and all of my data will be collected online using Amazon mTurk. So participants will randomly be assigned to one of three conditions. So they will either read a biomedical model of dementia that would be very similar to what would come up if you Googled what is dementia. A third will read a biopsychosocial model that is more integrative, and then a third will read the novel positive psychology informed model of dementia that discusses the symptoms, the changes that occur with dementia, while also giving weight to the positive experiences and the strengths of people with dementia. So participants will read one of those informational models, and then they will read a vignette describing a woman with Alzheimer's disease exhibiting a, quote, challenging behavior. They will then answer a few questions based upon the vignette, as well as more general questionnaires about their perceptions of dementia. as well as other factors that I am going to be testing how predictive they are of perception of dementia. So that includes demographics, personality, social desirability bias, and then of course questions assessing the perceived credibility of the model that the participant read. So briefly going over my hypotheses, hypothesis 1 is related to aim 1. I do expect there to be a difference in the perception of people with dementia among participants depending on which informational model they read. So I'm expecting that those who read the biomedical model will have kind of the worst perceptions of, or the most negative perceptions of people with dementia. The biopsychosocial group will be somewhere in the middle, and the positive psychology group will have the most positive perceptions of people with dementia. My second hypothesis relates to my second aim and is somewhat exploratory, but I have identified some factors that I think will be predictive of perception of dementia, including emotional responses to the vignette, ageism, fear and knowledge of Alzheimer's disease, personality factors, social desirability bias, demographic factors, as well as experience, kind of prior personal experience with dementia. So I have outlined the directions of these hypotheses, which you are free to read, but I will say that this is somewhat exploratory as some of the literature looking at these predictors is mixed in terms of what qualities predict more positive or negative perceptions. And then finally, my third hypothesis relates to my third aim. So I do expect that perceived credibility will differ based upon which informational model participants read. So this is very exploratory, but I am anticipating that perceived credibility will be highest for those who read the biomedical model because that is familiar, whereas it will be the lowest for the positive psychology informed model, as that is a kind of radical departure from the very negative symptom-focused view of dementia that's very prevalent. But I will be interested to see how big that difference is and to really get some data on, do people buy into this positive psychology informed model at all? And I'll also be controlling for a few factors that I anticipate will also affect perceived credibility of the model. And these are the questionnaires and measures that I'll be using. And then, as I said, I have not gathered data at this point, but I will conduct a variety of statistical analyses once I do have that data. So aim 1 will be tested using a MANOVA with the informational model. So the 3 levels is the independent variable, and then the 4 facets of perception of dementia as the dependent variables. Aim 2 will be tested using multiple linear regressions. And aim 3 will be tested using an ANCOVA, where the covariates that I think I'll need to control for when I'm looking at the relationship between credibility and informational model will be knowledge and fear of Alzheimer's disease, as well as personal experience with dementia. So of course the future directions will depend on the results once I have my data gathered. But in general, I'm anticipating that the results of this study will help improve our understanding of the relationship between the way that we talk about dementia and the way that people with dementia are perceived. I also am hopeful that the results will add to the body of literature looking at what factors predict perception of dementia among the general public. And then finally, the results have the potential to inform future research looking at the best way to describe dementia to the public, so public health initiatives that would be designed to improve accurate understanding of dementia without stigmatizing and in a way that really encompasses the full range of negative and positive experiences of people with dementia. I would like to say thank you to my dissertation committee, as well as the Graduate Student Council for awarding a research grant to fund this study. Thank you for watching my presentation today.